Welcome to Carleton at 60. This morning I have Rick Morgan, and Rick's been a member out here in some way in almost all the hiring of the pros, and that's what we're going to talk about today, the different professionals and some of the other staff perhaps that Rick had an involvement in hiring. But before we do that, Rick has a very interesting background. Rick, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. I have had several careers, if you want to look at it like that. Initially, I was a physical education person and have several degrees, most of which were in that field. I was the assistant athletic director at McGill University for a while. Got moved out of there when I joined IBM. So I became a high-tech person and an executive in later years. Was headhunted out of IBM to be a senior vice president with a venture capital, high-tech venture capital company, where I was doing hiring and hiring CEOs and presidents for the companies that were part of this venture capital company. And one of the firms that I used consistently was the Caldwell Partners International, the only national executive search firm at the time. And Doug Caldwell finally came to me at one point and said, "Rick, you hired some unbelievable people through us." He said, "You should be a headhunter," and opened the bank vault. And so I became a headhunter, working for Caldwell. A bunch of us left and started the second national firm in Canada. And then I left there and started my own firm. So I've been involved in many industries and worked for many boards, both for-profit and not-for-profit, etc. And I am happily and enjoyably retired.
You have retired. That's how'd you get to Carleton?
I was in Montreal, obviously, during my McGill days, and that's where I met my wife. All my kids were born there, and the government started to become a little too tough on the English. I'm perfectly bilingual, but my firstborn was born with only one ear, and it was the Montreal Children's Hospital who said, "This guy's going to have a tough enough time learning anything as he grows up with one ear." And at that time, the PQ made a decision that everybody born in Quebec had to go to school in Quebec. If you were born somewhere else, you'd have the choice of going to an English school. So we decided to come back to Ottawa.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then you came to Ottawa and you came to Carleton. You joined right away, or did you?
The first thing I did is I bought a house on the golf course.
Oh, wow. What year would that have been, Rick?
That was 1980.
Wow. So
1980, and everybody in Ottawa thought Manotick was halfway to Toronto. So there was nothing between downtown Ottawa that you had to worry about when I had an office downtown, and I'd drive in. The only thing I had to worry about was on what used to be called the Prescott Highway, which is Highway 16. There was a guy who crossed about 150 cows, and if I got there just as what the first one was crossing, I had to sit there for half an hour. So that was the worst part.
Yeah, that road has changed quite a bit. So has River Road over the last, because I've been in Manotick since 1980 as well. Now, we're going to talk about the pros today, and the first pro was Bob Paluzzi, and he was here about a year and a half. You weren't here at that time. This would have been 1964, 65. And then they hired a man named Paul Going, which you did have no involvement in this hiring, obviously, because you didn't show up till 80, but you knew him very well. Perhaps you could start with him and talk about Paul, because he's been an institution here and was here for 30 some odd years.
Yeah, I knew Paul very well, and even when I joined the golf club in 1980, I have a good friend who ended up becoming the athletic director at McGill, and so we worked together very close. And he was a golf pro. He was on the Canadian tour in the summer times and stuff like that. And he knew Paul. Paul came from Hillsdale Golf Club, which was I guess in proper words you'd call it an ethnic golf club at the time, north of Montreal. And he knew Paul well and said he was just a gem of a person, nice guy, good golfer, loved to bet. Especially on golf, and I'm not talking about on professional golf. He had a group of his good buddies, who I actually got to meet more than once, that he played with over on the Quebec side, even when he was the pro here, and they'd have a weekly game, usually at Tecumseh, where I grew up in the Gatineau Mills era, and they were playing. They'd play for some serious money, so he could play. Yeah. He could play. He ran a great shop. Back in the day, the pro owned the shop, so it wasn't like, even though a board would hire a professional, the professional was in charge of everything he did. Of course, it was across the street where the starter shack is right now. And we'll talk a little bit about that, because there was a turning point in our hiring process where the club would take over the shop. But he ran a good shop. I can remember him going up into the rafters in the back of the shed, when my son first started as a junior, and if you think I'm short, my son was very short at the time. He's a lot taller than I am now. But Paul went up and got down a set of clubs, and it looked like almost a brand new set. And he cut down the shafts, put on new grips, sold them to me for nothing, and that's how my son learned how to play golf.
Wow. But
he would do things like that. He would bend over backwards to try and help the people.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a great pro. I unfortunately never got a chance to meet him, but after Paul retired, I think it was in the mid-90s somewhere, we hired someone else.
Yes, it was. Paul would have retired around 1996. The board put together a search committee. I volunteered to be their executive search consultant, because that's what I was doing for a living back then. I've done a lot of work in the golf industry generally, and I did it pro bono. Of course, I wasn't going to charge the club for something that they didn't have to pay for, but I think there's a big difference. I know, or I wouldn't have been in the business. There's an absolutely significant difference to hire a professional to help you in a senior position, particularly when it's a volunteer board. They're unbelievably hard to work with for the most part, and because they change so often, and everybody has an opinion, or they wouldn't be on the board. They're on the board either to change something or to contribute somehow, but it's not an easy position. So I did the headhunting, and it's not just putting an ad in the paper somewhere or in PGA Canada. It's headhunting. It's calling pros and saying who's good for this. Here's our club, and explaining it and selling it. And for my job in my profession was always to come up with a short list of 6 to 8 people, and to arrive at that, I would probably interview 15 to 20 people personally myself, a full interview session, and I would have talked to upwards of 100 or more people to get that kind of a person. And Graham Gunn showed up.
Well, I thought there was an interim before Graham, right? Greg Ward, was he not here?
No, he would have been after, I think.
Okay.
He would have been in between Graham. I'm trying to think here. You may be right.
I think Greg was here before Graham, because
okay.
Yeah. So he got hired, but he was only here a very short time.
Yeah,
and then Graham.
Yeah, the only reason I thought it was after Graham is because that's when, in theory, Greg didn't work out for various reasons. One of which is, it doesn't matter why, but I thought it was when the the board started taking over the ownership of the golf property, and meaning they were involved in the financing of the whole thing, and so the pro didn't have to have money to go down to Florida every year to the conference and buy crap and everything else. But he was here a very, very short time.
Yeah, and then Graham did come.
Yes. And as you said, I wasn't involved with Greg at all. That was just an internal move made by the board, etc. So Graham turned out to be outstanding. I think Graham brought Carleton Golf and Yacht Club's name to the forefront in Ottawa, without a doubt, through his play mostly, because he won everything. And he's still winning everything. He's still the most winningest person pro anywhere. I remember when I did his references, everybody kept saying, "Wow, there's not." He came from the Toronto area, and Toronto Hamilton / and people were saying, "You'll never see a better player than this, who's not on the tour." But then again, he played on the British senior Open Championship. He played he played in 4 or 5 different places. I even have back in the day, if you don't mind me, he was on the European Senior Tour for a couple of years. He played the British Senior Open, the US Senior Open, the Canadian Open. Anyway, and won pretty well everything there is to win in Canada, let alone the OVGA. Still doing very, very well. And as I said, he put Carleton on the map because we were in the paper every second weekend, and everybody wanted to know him. And I think he was responsible for attracting many members too, because people wanted to be a member of this club back then.
Yeah. So Graham, I think, decided he wanted to pursue the European Tour at the time and left. Is that correct? Or
he got to a stage. He was here. What was it? Here I got the numbers here. He was here 97 to 2006.
Right.
Okay, so that's almost 10 years.
That's 10 years.
And if somebody stays 7 to 10 years anywhere in a senior position, they are either looking to move on and experience something else, or there comes a time when you can't afford them anymore. Yeah. And I think it was a combination of that. Graham's salary got to a spot where it had probably peaked and capped, and we're a not-profit organization, and you don't want to raise members' fees too much. And so I think the board were reluctant, but understood why he would move on somewhere.
Yeah, and that's kind of when that transition you were talking about too. When we hired the next pro. I think that's when it took place, where the club started taking over the pro shop operations. And I remember one of the pros, I was only here, you guys had wanted him. He was here for maybe a few days. He went to Australia, and we were kind of stuck without a pro in limbo in March and April. But then came someone else.
Yes, and that individual was actually the one you're talking about to Australia. Actually had accepted the job at one point, and then because of family complications and family issues, we were left in limbo for a little bit. And the next person that came along was Gord Percy. Yeah. For all the awards and everything that Graham won. On the professional side of it, and as a player, Graham, by the way, also sat on many PGA committees and everything else. And Gord was a player since he was 2 years old, when his babysitter showed him how to swing a club. He joined just north of Kingston. He joined a club near his hometown called Rivendale, and to this day he still owns the course record there at 11 under par. Wow. Which is 60. So he was a player too. Wow. But he also got a degree in physical education at Queen's University. So he was a teacher, and he those kinds of degrees teach you how to teach, and he became very, very well known in the OVGA as a teacher. He was teacher, club professional teacher of the year many, many times. Another great guy. Got along well with everybody. He ended up. He lived down in Smiths Falls, which is a fair commute, and not unlike the commute Joel Trickey does, and we'll talk about him maybe later on too. But he was hoping to get back down there, and had an opportunity as well to become the head professional and general manager of the club down there. But he currently is the head of the PGA Canada, and as we conduct this interview, he's over in St Andrews at the British Open, because that's one of the representative things that he does. He was head of PGA Quebec and the OVGA, and has all kinds of awards too. So between those two guys, and a almost 22-year period. We had the two best pros that you could ever get, certainly in Eastern Canada, maybe even in Canada, and very, very accomplished. So we were lucky to have them.
Well, don't forget Paul Going.
No, not at all. But back in the day, again, the pros weren't as involved in outside things unless they were actually playing a tournament or something.
What we're saying has been well served by the pros over the last 60 years.
Incredible, and let's go right on to the next pro, Cameron Gall, who grew up on the grounds of St. George's. His father was the course superintendent. He worked at Scarborough. He worked at Thornhill. Two tremendous courses. And anyway, I think we're being well served, even though he came in as a pro. He seems to be doing a whole lot more than that right now.
Yeah. And Tyler as well, currently
Yes.
as well. Let's talk about a couple of other famous hires you've had.
Famous. Where do we go from here? Probably the best thing that ever happened to this golf club was me finding Joel Trickey and him being available once again. He was down in the Toronto area. Here's a big guy. He was a good golfer in his day. His brothers have been either pros or GMs, etc. And he finished school with an MBA. Was on the taxi squad of the Toronto Argonauts, being such a big lad, so he was always very athletic. Went back after he did his MBA to Humber College to get a diploma in turf management. He loves growing grass, and he could grow it right on top of this table. 27 years ago, I cannot believe he's been poached, and he lives out in Westport, makes the drive all the time, doesn't bother him. He's maybe the best thing that ever happened to this club, frankly.
No question, he's got Carleton soil in his blood. He's not leaving. So he had that. He had I had a great interview with him earlier on in the year, and it's this is part of him.
Absolutely.
This place. You had another hire, general manager.
Yeah, Sheila McCurdy had been here forever. Grew up in the area, married an OPP individual by the name of Ian. Had two sons, still live in downtown Manotick. Unfortunately, Ian just passed away about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was at the funeral and saw the boys, who are all great, and Sheila's doing great. She was a manager. Okay, and so it was an administration position at the time, and we hadn't grown into general management yet. So when the time came that Sheila said, I'm ready to step down, and she was lauded and thanked and given a full membership for the family, etc. And the board at the time said maybe it's time we should get a general manager, and I had been doing some work for that for Royal Montreal, Royal Ottawa, and quite a number of other clubs. So we ended up going out looking for a general manager. Lo and behold, the person that ended up being the successful candidate wasn't even running a golf club. He was running a curling club, and but was again highly thought of. And as you know, I think, John, I'm a bear at references. I do at least 9, and it usually ends up being 15 or 16 people that I have hours-long chats with. He came in here as our first general manager, and I think he did an outstanding job. He was here once again for quite a long time. He's currently the general manager at Camelot, and has been there quite a number of years. And once again, he spent his time here, and people get itchy feet, and it's time to move. And that was a bigger opportunity. And I actually, a client of mine was the president of the club at the time, and I got a call from him. I didn't even know John was looking around, or excuse me, Greg was looking around, but the president at the time was his first name was John, and he says, "Rick, what do you know about Greg Richardson?" And he was the president and head of the search committee, and they hired him away from us. But once again, he took everything to a different level as well, and served us very, very well. So we were again lucky to have him for the period we do.
Rick, I want to thank you very much. I want to have you back to talk about other things. This has been a marvelous interview. I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else you may want to add before we close off?
No. I made a couple of notes here, but I think you've pretty well covered them all. The only other thing, I don't know if your camera can even catch this. I'm one of my degrees is in history, and I tend to collect everything I can and keep it, and particularly when it's golf. I mean, I was on.
It's got all these.
I was on several committees at Golf Canada for quite a number of years, and I found my wife found these in a drawer, and I thought to myself, wow, I didn't even know I had all those things. So it's time to start cleaning up my collections.
Thanks, Rick, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, John, and you're doing a great thing, in light of an anniversary that's coming up. And I've often thought with a couple of other people that there was room for a history of the club. Certainly when we get to 100, maybe, in which case neither one of us will be around.
No.
But you're doing a great job, and I really appreciate it. And feel free to I may have some stories that you can't put on camera.
We'll listen to those too.
All right.
Thanks.